it's me, I'm back. Yeah, I've not uploaded anything in a while, and I'm not going to get too into it, because it's nothing bad. I said that like it's like a terrible thing. Nah, COVID was about, so I made loads of stuff on this channel, and then COVID went away, and I went to do some other stuff. Some of it's on this channel here, and yeah, and now I just feel like making another wee YouTube video thing. I don't expect any kind of upload schedule or anything, because I'm just doing this when I feel like it. That's basically everything I want to say, I don't know. Yeah. Thanks for watching the LEGO Star Wars video quite a bit. I got like quite a few views, and I actually know someone in real life now who saw that video before they met me, and that's kind of terrifying. I should not be viewed in any context, really. So, do you remember when like YouTubers would disappear for like 2 months, and all the comments would be like, do you think they died? Do you think Ray William Johnson is dead? Anyway, I'm stealing my neighbour's Wi-Fi, and I think they're going to send their dog after me once I've uploaded this. So it must be important, right? Kind of. It's kind of a mess, though. I was going to talk about tech demo games. You know, games that are intended more to show off cool new tech and get people aware of the new CryEngine or whatever, more than tell an interesting story or have engaging gameplay or leave you with some lasting impression. Surprisingly, this isn't a very good way of making games, and there is some cool stuff that's come out that I would consider tech demo games, like Killzone 2, but when I played stuff for that video, I don't know why all the recommendations are Marvel shit, specifically Black Widow. Look at the shocking amount of Black Widow there is here. Like, why? What is that? It's not logged in or anything. Rise, Son of Rome. Not bad. It like a Call of Duty campaign with melee combat and a Rome theme. Reminded me a bit of old PS2 hack and slashes, like the Return of the King game in its simplicity and focus on set pieces, but is genuinely pretty in a solid way to show off the wonders of the Xbox One. That is kind of what I was thinking about while playing it though, the Xbox One. Remember they announced this thing, like, this isn't a games console, and then they spent the entire generation going, no, we swear it is, we swear it is. But yeah, no, my point is, tech demo games aren't very interesting, it turns out. But I'd already played and written a whole thing on Rage, and for reasons you'll see, I couldn't just upload that by itself, so I thought, hey, let's look at some of the weird shit id have developed in the past. The stuff like Rage that just isn't given the same interest as the big stuff. Like, you ever look at Steam sales for a developer or publisher and it has all the new stuff they're proud of, and then there's a bit at the bottom that's like, the classics, and it's all like £2. That's what these are. You scroll down and you find Hunted, The Demon's Forge, or Escape Dead Island. Random guff that nobody really cares about, and I decided to make a video on because I'm an idiot. It'd have a huge backlog of this sort of thing. Not all guff though. There's a good selection of their output that doesn't get much attention just because it's old, really. They're an old company, and developers were out there making a lot of stuff back then, especially in smaller, lower budget markets like the MS-DOS one, which it were a part of. Each of the founders came from a company called Softdisk, which is notable for being how id Software started, really. It ran a game subscription service called Gamer's Edge, where the id Software members made small games for this service. And that'll be mentioned a little more in a bit, but even after id was formed, they had to develop more games for Softdisk as a contractual thing, and that's what I'm going to look at for a bit. The DOS shit. Starting with Commander Keen, which is probably the least forgotten of its old forgotten DOS games, with 5 games and that cancelled mobile game from a couple of years back. It's all on Steam, even if it's just kind of jank DOSBox emulation, along with this definitive edition of Keen Dreams from this year. The Dopefish is from it and everything. This is because it was both its first game as id Software and first success, relatively speaking. It's a DOS game, it made about 30k in its first 10 days, but that's in comparison to the publisher Apogee's previous sales average of 7k. A great success, yay, and probably worth keeping in mind because, again, DOS, this game's whole creation comes from a tech demo, hey look at that, which showed off smooth scrolling on PC. If you're not sure what smooth scrolling is, play basically any game. It's when the screen moves with the player. It's such a basic thing now, but it's something computers were struggling with while consoles were miles ahead, and John Carmack worked it out, leading to Commander Keen. That was the bar at the time. Not that there wasn't cool stuff between the Oregon Trail and the Secret of Monkey Island, but different stuff. Consoles had all the cool, exciting games, while PC was made for freaks. It was more a place for slower, niche titles due to both its placement as more of a tool than a console, and the fact it was a bit rubbish. I am skimming a wee bit. I know there's incredible stuff here, and the early PC games market is just kind of interesting in general, but I want to emphasise that no one would be comparing this to Mario. This is a strange beast that is essentially a tech demo for something we've taken for granted for decades. Hell, it was taken for granted back then by most of the industry. This is a game that still has some relevant iconography to this day, despite being made entirely for the PC game market of 1990, and that's it. Like, one of the devs said enemies should stay after they die to teach children that death is permanent, and apparently no one argued. Even when he based enemies off Freud theories, whatever that fucking means, they didn't exactly have, like, limited edition Taco Bell meals and Happy Meals or whatever. And I say all this because it's a bit rough today. Putting the first one up, I actually thought it was pretty cool. Like, I like the story a lot. It's just a Calvin and Hobbes-ish child fantasy. Like, you see these weird aliens and the game's about Commander Keen, but for its description, you know it's just some kids playing about. He's not even a commander, he's just some kid called Billy. I'm pretty sure that's treason. It's not much, but it's cute, and the game works okay. It's like where you explore levels to find keycards to open up more level. Controls are a little clunk, and I don't know how exactly they work. Billy doesn't just bounce up when you press jump, it's like an action itself you have to wait a little second to do. Unlike games with similar movement though, Billy can move in midair like a normal platformer. It's just that I found the sluggishness of it made it kind of difficult to pinpoint exactly how he'll move if you don't wait till he's at the top of a jump. It's not amazing. I feel like they might have been going for normal platformer movement but couldn't quite get it to work right, but there's an intentionality and weight to every jump that it adds. It just made me think more about where I was going, which, that's nice. The graphics are alright as well for what it is. The amount of grey is weird, and it's not particularly detailed, but all the designs are cartoony and appealing, and yeah. It just kind of works, I don't know, you kind of get it by looking at it. It's Commander Keen in it. Then I died, and went back to the start of the level, as you'd expect, but that's kind of the problem I ran into. Levels are pretty big and not that dangerous, but can kill you very easily when they decide to be. It's not like Donkey Kong or whatever, where you go from challenge to challenge. There's points where you're just hanging out. So my experience was, I'd go into a level, comb out all the collectibles, slowly because of the movement, and then die to something, having to do it all over again. The death could just be me being stupid, or more egregiously, it could have been the level design. This tunnel had an enemy in it. I scraped this icicle. I didn't know there was an enemy in this corridor. All technically my fault, but all kind of hard to notice when you've just been jumping about collecting stuff for 5 minutes, and all send you back out the level. And this is partially why I brought up the whole DOS thing. I'm not experiencing this in the context that it would have been intended for, both with amazing scrolling technology and this being the game you chip away at for ages. As I said, PCs were a place for slower, more niche games, so I'm not totally sure if this was partially designed with that market in mind. Between the slow jumps, the exploratory levels, and this cool mechanic of your gun having limited ammo, it points towards a game that you're supposed to be much more careful with, and think about what you're doing, more so than something like Mario. And so I pulled back a bit. You have limited lives with a game over, but it's split into 3 episodes around half an hour long, and as I said, it's not too dangerous, just slow. I can do this, and I did, to be fair. I got through the first episode and had a better time once I stopped thinking about progression and just saw how far I could get. It might be a slight nostalgia, but I find DOS games just kind of cozy. These weren't being put on fancy games consoles made to play video games, they were time wasters made by nerds to be played on massive calculators, so there's this roughness to it and an active interaction with it that just I kind of enjoy. Maybe it's some mindfulness thing, but with how games and technology in general pushes to be more streamlined and smooth, there's something nice about playing a game where control is jump and the sounds are... This might be the same appeal people get with Atari. You're not putting it in and having
"You are now entering the video game realm, prepare to die"
appear as you get sucked into Nathan Drake's pores. You're reading its story for a help screen and being told these big grey warehouses are Mars. But that forces you to use your imagination a bit in a cool way, just like Commander Keen himself. It's just a shame then that I would die and have to repeat all of this. It really is slow, and the other games don't seem to improve on this a ton. I played quite a bit of Goodbye Galaxy when I was a wee one, and I love this DOS vibe to the music and visuals. It's just so soft and cozy, man. The music's got its medieval vibe that sounds more medieval than actual medieval music, and the graphics still feel kind of simple but do their best with colours and designs. It's nice. It's just that, if anything, the level design's worse. Levels like Slug Village have fantastic names, and this huge underground section with all sorts of items and enemies that can be completely ignored by walking in a straight line over it all. Other levels just feel kind of randomly put together without much sense of level progression. Some are tiny and then some are way too big. Some of them feel genuinely like random stuff you'd find on Mario Maker, which feels mean, but it was designed by John Romero and Tom Hall, so I don't really know what happened here. It's still kind of fun, and I think it was similarly impressive back when it was made on a technical side, but I just found it kind of exhausting when I had to deal with going back again. Anyway, Commander Keen's cool. Mostly just cool, with the stuff I like being the presentation and just general, I guess, but still cool, and was pretty technologically helpful for PC gaming. It's just a shame it's a bit rough. Still has an appeal, but that appeal maybe isn't as direct nowadays as other platformers from the time. Cool though. Cool. How many times can I put cool in a paragraph? I'm...
Listen.
You might actually know this one as the first ever first-person shooter. Wolfenstein 3D usually gets this label, but it isn't actually. It's also not Catacombs 3D though. Hovertank 3D isn't really either. Like any genre, no one person or work created it, but id are known for at least forming it into a genre, and this was their first shot at it, with this being the first game to use the engine Catacombs 3D and Wolfenstein 3D would later. It's basic, you shoot enemies, pick up hostages and leave, using these slow clunky controls without even a strafe. You can charge your attack by holding down the button, or not, since it doesn't seem to make much of a difference. It's really basic. I kinda love it. As I said earlier, the PC game market at this time was kind of small and strange. Apparently building this game's engine took 6 weeks. Not very long. But that's also their engine that took the longest to make at the time, being a whole 2 weeks longer than anything before. That's weird now. Unreal Engine 5 took about 2 years to make apparently. You have these huge PC gamer shows whenever Jeff Keighley decides to take over my Twitter feeds, but at the time the industry was made up of guys in garages cobbling stuff together. And while Hovertank 3D isn't very interesting from a more gamey perspective, it's a cool time capsule of the PC games industry by just being weird. The very first thing I noticed in the game is that the objective writing just feels off. Your first assignment is to rescue a bunch of scientists. They were working on a new clean fuel until some big oil corporations decided to buy Langston out. You know what I mean? It's not grammatically wrong or anything, it's just kind of off. Like a teacher would tell you to change this. You can tell it's just some guy writing it. Ignore that I also talk and write like this because I'm not talking about oil companies right now, which is another thing that I noticed actually. This game's sort of punky. The first villain you're given is just oil companies, and then a couple levels later it reads, "The government have decided, with their usual compassion, to nuke the Legion along with their hostages." Like, it's not huge. It's more than I expected though of Hovertank 3D of all things. There is some context. Wikipedia and a couple other sites say that this takes place during a nuclear war where the city is full of mutated humans, so you're not quite just enacting eco-terrorism, but I had to actively search for that, and even then it's vague. My first impressions were just that this game is very angry, and that kind of rules, honestly. I like that. This is a bit of a random one, but the sounds Like, another first impression was picking up a hostage and then immediately laughing as I got a little
Yay!
Then I died and heard someone very loudly shout,
Oh shit.
before the most bit-crushed explosion ever played. Like, it's just charming and funny, and I'm pretty sure half the sounds are the same one guy. Like, listen to the gun sound. That is just some guy going like, or something. And you kill an enemy and it's like, come on, these are all just some guy sitting around a microphone. I also like this guy, he's in my notes, and I don't remember why I put him there. But like, I think I get it, he has this weird charm. I think it's his gorgeous blue eyes with like the little flesh bit. Oh, and I like the level transition because it plays this cool sound, and I still don't know exactly what it's showing. Come back next video for more in-depth game analysis. Yeah, the game's not incredible or terrible or anything. Like, it's a tech demo for this first-person engine. It works as that. It was probably pretty cool in 1991. I could talk about the game more and complain that its levels are a bit repetitive or something, but I really like its clunky little presentation and the way the developer's personality bleeds through accidentally. It's cool. It's also free on my abandonware, so go check it out for 10 minutes and then comment below, what are you fucking talking about? Because I just wrote a review where I mostly say, I like the sounds.
These are the sounds of the Catacomb. Beware.
And now we're actually talking about Catacomb. As in the Catacomb, the 1989 game a bunch of the id staff developed while working for Softdisk. And when I booted up this Catacombs pack that's on GOG, the first option it gives you is the Catacomb. So I picked that and was launched into this funky thing. As I said, this was id staff working for Softdisk rather than as id, but I still thought I'd bring it in because there isn't too much to say. It was originally released under Gamer's Edge, which I mentioned a while back. This was like an old equivalent of Humble Monthly or PlayStation Plus, where they'd send you games for the low price of $29.95 for a free month trial, when you'd usually pay $20, $30 or even more in your favourite software store. This Catacombs pack also includes the original Gamer's Edge demo disc Catacomb would have been on, which has different levels to the Catacomb to be fair, and it's also kind of a cool time capsule. Like, if you want to send your opinion on the games, you have to post it to them physically. I'm going to send them Godfall, so that they understand that's the bar now. You can't get away with these bad graphics. Anyway, I'm talking about this magazine stuff because the game's just, like, fine. It's a top-down shooter on the PC from 1989. You collect keys to open doors and shoot monsters with spells like the default fireball, a charged fireball, nukes, and a bolt. You go on YouTube and say something meaningful about this game. Like, there's not much wrong with it other than secret walls being a bit annoying and it being a top-down shooter on the PC from 1989. You use the arrow keys for moving and aiming. It's kind of fucked, but you know, there's not much to say, really. Take that though, add Hovertank 3D, texture mapping, which this was the first to use, and you have Catacomb 3D. I've built this game up a bit by accident, and now I'm just going to drop that, like, it's not that good. Even though it has the Gate of Slime. It's more of a traditional, complete video game than something like Hovertank 3D or the original Catacomb, using the tech of Hovertank 3D and the game designiness of Catacomb with its enemy types and different weapons. It even has strafing, and a hub system, and it looks pretty nice too. If you don't know what texture mapping is, you're looking at it. Hovertank 3D just had these blank walls, while this manages to paint actual locations for it. I just found it a bit boring though. There's no writing to speak of, so none of the punkiness of Hovertank or anything. It does carry over Hovertank's clunkiness though, through this slow turning, which I'm not going to blame it for exactly, being such an early FPS, but playing Hovertank, it's at least like, yeah, I'm a tank. Like, it's going to be slow, you know? But here, what is it? Part of the reason I think people remember Wolfenstein 3D as the first FPS rather than this is because, by comparison, it feels so light and smooth, even on a keyboards. Light and smooth is how you describe yogurt. I don't know why I wrote that for an FPS game. This is impressive, but not really fun. There's also the fact there's one music track for this whole game, it seems, which loops every few seconds, which... I got to a level with the Hall of Doors, which was an endless amount of doors with enemies behind them. Got to the end of that, which was just more enemies, implying the exit was behind one of these doors. Nah. Very impressive and influential and all that for its time. I struggled to find much to enjoy nowadays. Got some DOS charm like this level complete sound. But overall, not for me. It got sequels by other devs which look kind of cool, and apparently Armageddon goes into the present day of 1992, which is fun, but let's move on just now. On that Gamer's Edge demo was another game called Dangerous Dave, a fairly simple platformer it developed while working for Softdisk. It's fine. It's similar to the original Catacomb, where there's nothing much wrong with it, it's just very, very basic. We're so detached from its release that I can't really say much on it. But they then used that Dangerous Dave character for a tech demo showing off the previously mentioned smooth scrolling, and made Dangerous Dave in the Haunted Mansion, which is this cool little platformer game. The original Dangerous Dave doesn't really have much intentional identity, as it's just trying to be a platformer, but this ends up cementing him as a country American horror type, going into this big spooky mansion with just a shotgun and his lucky red cap.
Oh my god, that's his lucky red hat! He's a box!
Dangerous Dave.
The box!
It's a cool little theme for a DOS game. The overall jankiness of that platform makes it fit the theme fairly well, as you'd crouch around a tiny monitor playing this mysterious game after inputting a bunch of codes. It doesn't go really far, but touches like this comic panelish death screen is cool and gives it a nice roughness that is kind of seen in other id games of the time, only this actively leans into it. Doesn't have music, but oh well. It also works for gameplay. It reminds me a bit of Castlevania and how horror wasn't quite an established game genre at the time, at least in a mainstream capacity, so they resort to the horror bleeding through a standard platformer. Bleeding. Commander Keen was a fairly chilled out platformer based on stuff like finding collectibles, at least in comparison to this where you're constantly having enemies and traps thrown at you. It's a much more intense game and you're dealing with a lot more in the moment to moment. There's zombies that slowly walk to you, along with these slime guys that crawl between the ceiling and floor, and these weird goblin people who throw tiny knives. These things are really hard to see, and to fight them you're using this shotgun, which isn't as strict as something like the Castlevania whip, being quicker and allowing you to smoothly aim up and down, but does still restrict you by keeping you still whenever firing and requiring you to reload. You have unlimited ammo, and whenever you stand still Dave will load the gun, but you are limited to 8 shots before having to reload. It's enough, but it's one of those things that pushes the game into encouraging a more careful and intentional playstyle, weirdly clearing out enemies room by room and taking breaks to reload. It does still have its problems. It's similar to Commander Keen, where you die in one hit before going back to the start of this huge level, and there's random traps you just won't know about and will probably die to on your first try, but I don't mind it as much in something more intense like this when it isn't a level of nothing before I get to the danger. It also just pushes you back to the last level when you get a game over, which is a nice way of giving lives meaning without being too punishing, and I can't think of another game to do this, weirdly. Probably exists, I just can't think of it. The other problem I found though is that there's no save function, so you have to beat the game in one sitting, and I just found that it took too long. You could pin this down to my greasy Gen Z brain of the TikTok, but after I'd saw a pigeon get hit by a bus, and then it started recommending me videos of pigeons, I uninstalled that so quick because what is going on there? Either way, I found it hard to get far in this because it does take a while to get through the levels, and by the time I got far I was feeling a bit too done to face any challenge, I guess. Still liked it though, good fun, holds up pretty well and just overall nice and comfy. There are a couple more DOS games I played I could talk about, but I played Shadow Knights, but it wasn't really good. Platformer with a focus on combat where the combat inherently doesn't work, which if you watched my little Xbox Live Indie Games video, you'll know that that's not fun to talk about really. But I'll talk about it still. The range on your attack means that you just get hit by enemies, but then you can heal with items you find, so it just kind of flatlines into getting hit, healing, getting hit, healing. Not great. There's also Rescue Rover, which is a little puzzle game where you push boxes to save a dog. Looks fine, but it's £7, and I don't think I have much to say about it, honestly. I'm skint, okay? Tales of the Dragon is a Mahjong game, so I could obviously talk about that for ages, but don't worry, I'll spare yous. Other than that though, there isn't really much we haven't covered. I don't really like to say things haven't aged well, because it seems kind of, simplifying it a bit. However, these don't have the kind of inherent reasons you would play games, I don't think, nowadays. They don't play particularly well or anything like that. But they've got a really nice just atmosphere to them, and they come from a culture that just doesn't exist now in the same way. Like, these are fairly mainstream in terms of the game market at the time, and they feel like fan games nowadays in their kind of just attitudes and stuff. Like, kind of slight lack of professionalism, which is nice. Like, a good lack of professionalism. Like, I didn't like Catacombs 3D, I just found it really boring, but I don't hate it or anything, because it's got this kind of just nice charm and personality to it. I feel like I know it. I feel like it's just a guy that I know. And I think part of it might be the intention behind just DOS, because you play console games, even from the time, and it feels like a game. Like, it feels like it's built to be this playable thing. But these all feel like solitaire. They all feel kind of cobbled together, and that's just nice. I like that. Like, I don't really mention it because I didn't really talk about Dangerous Dave, but in that, they spell stuff out with level parts. I think that's what was happening here. When I Google PCR, it just comes up with, like, COVID tests. And that's something you would genuinely see in Mario Maker or fucking Minecraft adventure maps or something, you know? It's just such a direct communication from the dev to the player that is so kind of mask off. You don't really get this now, especially in anything remotely AAA. Like, you might get a "thanks for playing our game" or something, but the dev isn't meant to be seen, really. And I don't want, like, developers to get this big celebrity status and get put in their games and stuff like that. But when it's something, and in this context where it's this new art form that is slowly growing and they're slowly finding their own way with it, and the audience for it's quite small, it's just nice to have that little I've not scripted any of this, I'm really sorry. And now I guess I'm going to give you all whiplash by jumping from these small, cute, old DOS titles to a Rage! Rescue Rover isn't in this one, fucker.
Three-dimensional. It's texture map. It's Wolfenstein.
Anyway, as I said, this was for when this was a tech demo video, because this feels particularly tech demo-y, and I think the reason becomes kind of clear straight from the concept. I looked on Wikipedia and immediately it says, the game's origins were in the concept of muscle cars within a desert setting, which was expanded upon by the creation of a post-apocalyptic world, which... what a concept. It's almost as good as the screen moving with the player. I'm sitting here trying to work out how to talk about this game, and I'm kind of struggling, to be honest, so, like, I'm just going to be quite blunt. Rage feels like nothing. A consistent retrospect I've seen for this game is that they don't remember anything, and I believe them. Like, I was busy and had to leave this for a few days after finishing the game, and I barely remembered it. I felt like I'd played it a year ago. In fact, I'm recording this now a couple months later, and I feel like I didn't play it. Like, actual time vacuum. All I can remember is, like, car? It is empty, soulless, and feels like it was just made to push tech. The "from the creators of Doom and Quake" line on the box should specify Quake 2. The tech is the one thing mentioned in relation to this game, because good old John Carmack again. You know who he is, so they wheel him out as a celebrity, and then he speaks this wizard-type gibberish about, like, 5G radiation or something, tech words. It was the debut title for Agetec 5, which would go on to be used for Wolfenstein: A New Order, Old Blood, and The Evil Within. All cool as hell games, but the big graphical showcase they pushed for this was Mega Textures. Don't worry, I already googled what that is. It's basically a big texture from what I can tell, which is my kind of evolution, just make it big, I don't know. big Watsits, you know? It paints map with this huge 3200 by 3200 texture and then streams what is needed. So instead of loading a map and then walking about with the entire map being loaded, this loads the map and then only shows what you're seeing at high quality, meaning you could, for example, make a bigger level without using tons of memory or splitting it into smaller levels with loading screens in between. Similar to what was used in Flight Sims and Myth: The Fallen Lords from 1997. Oh no. Yeah, I'm not a big computer knowledge person, so I am just saying what I'm told. That sounds like I'm kidnapped, I don't know why. But apparently megatextures were a thing before Rage kind of claimed them, so that's something. id Tech's 5 focus on it gave it more conversation though, where I found that they were apparently not that useful. The problem is just that it didn't fit very well into the workflow of a lot of the groups that would use it. For example, if you wanted to change something in a map, it would be much easier to just change the specific file that contains what you want to change, rather than a huge file that contains everything. Again, I don't know much about how all this works. Megatextures might have been an improvement for developers, but the point is that they'd have to actively integrate it into projects, which there wasn't much reason to do when things were seemingly working fine. They are still around from what I can tell. Newer Unreal engines call them virtual textures, which seems to be particularly helpful for VR titles, since it's much more likely you'll be cramming your face up against walls, and this selective streaming allows it to prioritise the quality of wherever wall your face is pushed up against. Again, all technical shit that I don't know a ton about. What I do know though is that it just doesn't look very good. It looks nice in areas where some designers actively composed what you're going to see, but get anywhere near anything and you'll notice the blur. This is in other 360 and PS3 games of course, but it's really just small textures there. Don't stare too close at a magazine in a shop or something, not just don't stare. And that takes a lot away from the fancy graphics when they're always on the verge of falling apart. Quake 2 you can at least put next to a lot of other games from 1997 and say, damn, look at that. But putting Rage next to a lot of 2011 games isn't that impressive. Or maybe it is. This was the year of Duke Nukem Forever, Brink and Homefront. What a year. Rage maybe looks better than other games of the time, but only temporarily. It's on this weird graph where it's jumping from nice to blech constantly, which compared to something that just looks good consistently is not really an improvement, never mind actively impressive. Also, I mentioned Homefront in that for 2011 games, but there was also Battlefield 3, which just looks good and feels technically impressive. Whenever best graphics were brought up around this time, I remember Battlefield, not Rage though. Animations are very nice though. Enemies don't ragdoll, they all have animations where they'll dramatically fall to the floor grabbing their knee or whatever. It's cool, and adds this cinematic smoothness to everything, which is fun. Well done, Rage. Artistically, it's I like the high contrast dark shadows look it has. It's kind of comic booky, kind of Borderlands-y, but with more realistic characters who still have some personality for odd designs. That's the problem though, it's kind of Borderlands-y. In fact, it's very Borderlands-y. It's also very Mad Max and Fallout, and weirdly really Jack Free-ish. There's not much about Rage that feels like its own thing. The game's origins were in the concept of muscle cars within a desert setting, which was expanded upon by the creation of a post-apocalyptic world, and you can really tell there's some theming. Some of the bandits have a British punk style, there's also some steampunk stuff, it does a bit of cyberpunkish stuff, kind of. There's also an intro cutscene that feels pretty different to everything else in the game. I like the punk stuff, it adds highlights of colours to the very barren wasteland without being overbearing or straying from the rest of the game's world, but they're not here that much. They're more early enemies and get thrown away for Russians in diving suits or the Combine. These are fine I guess as well, but they're a small part, so it goes back to the game's origins were in the concept of muscle cars within a desert setting. Mutant Bash TV's cool as well. It had this kind of rundown wasteland circus thing going on, but like, I'm pointing these out bit by bit. The overall image I get of Rage is Wastelands. I am going to emphasise, this is weirdly similar to the Jack games. Similar sounds, big cars fighting, the outfits, the wasteland, it all feels kind of familiar, but I remember Jack because it's fucking weird. You got these cartoony, larger-than-life fellows in this grim wasteland with all these old worlds. It's also obviously borrowing ideas, but it combines them in a weird way. This just takes stuff that's been done together and then does it again. And everything kind of interesting it tries gets dropped very quickly. So we don't really have much of a baseline for this world. Mad Max, some sci-fi stuff, and some punky stuff is the decoration to a story which is definitely from an id game. Doom starts with... Wolfenstein starts with... And Quake starts with... I like how the music just shifts like that. John Carmack in particular is known for saying that storytelling isn't the point of games, and while he's taken this back a bit now, it's a perspective that would have followed the company through most its life. As games went on though and became more concerned with story, it followed a bit with the kind of non-committal approach you'd expect. Quake 2 has some lore and named locations, and Doom 3 has a baddie, while focusing some effort into immersing you into its world. But we come to Rage and it feels like a huge step back. I need to go over just how this game starts, because I was genuinely shocked at how little effort is put into basically anything. The game starts with a little intro cutscene telling you you've been frozen through time basically. You then wake up, get jump scared and rescued by John Goodman, who drives you to a town and tells you to kill some bandits that's been bugging them. You then drive back where you came from, shoot some bandits, get kidnapped to absolutely no consequence, kill some more bandits, and then leave. Just like that. You then go back and you're sent to collect medical supplies from a nearby town who need you to, of course, go kill some bandits who stole one of their citizens. And this just loops for the first part of the game. You go to a place, shoot some bandits, and leave. I didn't miss any details. I said that John Goodman drives you to the town rather than he introduces you to it, because that's what he does. This town actually has its own characters and, well, one side quest and minigame, but it has no interest in trying to make you care. This is a cinematic shooter with absolutely no cinematic sensibilities. Everything is just shown to you, without any flair or excitement. It's just, here's a town. When it should look big as you're entering, showing the hustle and bustle and introducing a few fun personalities as you walk through, or some kind of exciting introductory mission. Something! It shouldn't just dump you in with a bad side quest. Compare this to Doom 3, where you're actually introduced to Mars. It foreshadows plot and doesn't handhold you through, but nudges you to talk to NPCs, explore, look at all their weird tech and monitors, and just fuck about with stuff. When you are given your job as well, it doesn't just end with you walking back to the cafeteria to complain about the food. A drama actually happens, and you're not just meandering while being told you're doing a good job. There's not a mission that has you driving a few yards, pressing E on something, and then leaving to do a random unrelated time trial. Rage seems to know this isn't very good though. After a little while, John Goodman tells you you've made things much safer for his family, who you'd never met or knew existed. So he tells you to go to a town called Wellspring, and the game actually introduces you to this place. You meet the mayor, go to a bar which has all these weird locals. People mutter things to you on the streets, and it just feels like an actual place people would exist in. It finally feels like the game is going somewhere, but the plot just keeps meandering. This game isn't really about anything. The plot is just you getting told to do things. You start out as a mercenary because everyone just profiled you as one, and you go about doing odd jobs, which would be fine honestly if the odd jobs were odder, but everything just feels like a boring side quest, with a few exceptions like Mutant Bash TV. There's barely any story to any of it. It's just a series of excuses to put you in tunnels with some evil guys. The game does have some form of plot in the Authority, who are mentioned quite a bit at the start. Gonna emphasise mentioned there though, because you never see them. For most of the game they might as well not exist. The towns truck along just fine. Any issues in the world seem to be caused by those awful bandits. You don't see Authority troops pushing civilians to the ground, you don't get pulled aside for questioning, you just go through your day-to-day life. That is until you're pulled aside and, like with the mercenary stuff, just assumed to be interested in joining the rebellion. So you're sent to their prison block to save someone, and that is when you first meet them. Your first encounter with the villains, who are literally called the Authority, is when you go to their base and start shooting them. I assumed they're evil with a name like that, but now I'm not that sure honestly. I feel like I'm skimming through all this a bit and not focusing on many elements of the story, but the problem is there's nothing to focus on. I mentioned the authority as the villain rather than one particular leader, because there isn't one. The main villain is just a bunch of basic enemies. Spoilers for the ending. Wait. Hey, there's nothing to spoil. It doesn't really have an ending either. The final boss is a few waves of grunts. You then send a satellite to space so you can find more people like you from the past. Presumably because they can just be bossed about endlessly like you were. And that's it. The entire ending is actually a minute long. It's so weird to play something like this that has a big budget and team behind it and understands that it should be about something, but just has no storytelling, like, in general, or ideas for its world, or anything. And I'm pretty sure that was the only concept they had. I don't know what happened here. I feel like something must have gone really wrong during development, because you don't just forget to give your game a villain like that. There's also stuff like how in Wellspring the speakers say about homes being destroyed, and stuff which would imply its mayor is awful, but he's just portrayed as a charismatic guy. It's never mentioned outside of this background detail. I like the people in towns. That's it really, like the story is not good, and along with the dull presentation is kind of the reason that I feel so about this game in general, because it plays fine. It's an FPS and racing game, but mostly an FPS, and given its software history with FPSs, it shouldn't be a surprise that it works just fine. I mentioned the animations making things feel nice, and that's definitely part of it. The way enemies charge at you and then toss themselves aside helps things feel cool. The guns generally feel good as well, especially the assault rifle. This shitty pipe thing looks clunky enough that blasting a folk away with it is just a nice time. But I don't want to immediately go back to complaining, but damn dude. But aside from some general nice game feel, there isn't a lot going on with the combat. It feels sort of like a hybrid of new and old, but not in a Wolfenstein The New Order way with health packs and stuff. It's kind of like a COD-y modern shooter with regenerative health and pretty simple enemy types, but there's a lot of weapons you can hold at once, enemies feel more direct in how they attack you, and you don't need to aim down sights really. It's a modern shooter that's been loosened up a bit, but that ends up not quite capturing the best parts of either FPS style. Because enemies are fairly simple, you can get away with just using the same weapon in most cases. There's occasionally a tough dude that it'd be good to have a rocket launcher against, but apart from that I found myself just kind of wandering through levels, not really caring what I was using. I didn't use the game's BFG once, because you get it on the final mission, and that final mission is mostly grunts, which I thought would waste it, so I just didn't use it. And then, possibly because they wanted to keep it feeling somewhat old school, there's none of that roller coaster feeling games like Call of Duty have, where they grab you and push you through levels in a particular way. The game just plainly gives you linear hallways with guys in them, and because the plot is so dry, these places don't really stand on their own without that deliberate pacing, so it ends up feeling a bit half-baked. Something's missing. What's here isn't terrible, as I said though. It's hard to talk about much because it is just game feels cool, but there were a good few moments that felt cool enough for me to save clips. That's nice. They also keep pushing into the old school FPS stuff. I got told to
Pick up that gun.
which, hey, there's even a bobblehead of Blake, which I thought was related to Blake Stone, but nah, basketball I guess. Rage can be fun, see? The Russian subtitles say Suka because no one knew what Suka was in 2011 apparently. Year of The Gag Quartet, Le Internet Medley, over 40 memes in one song. I also mentioned cars. In another weird connection to the Jack games, it has car combat with races, and it's again fine. Less fine, more obviously flawed, but gets away with that by being goofy car combat. It's not Jack X, which sounds like a joke if you don't know how good Jack X is, but it works. Cars go fast, you shoot other cars and they explode. It's the kind of dumb okay gaming that makes me sound dumb when I describe it. It's pushed more to the side, being used only for these side missions outside of a couple main ones, and I understand why that is. It's very different to the FPS stuff, but it feels a little bit underutilised, especially when it just peters out at the end. No cool final car fight, just drive to the final level and that's you. It's maybe a good thing it's not utilised a ton because it isn't amazing, as I say. Cars feel a bit too light, especially in a game about muscle cars, and that brings the whole thing down a bit. You're not crushing these hunks of metal against each other, you're shooting a wee missile at another one, and that's not really what I imagine when I hear rage, you know? And, yeah. I've very abruptly just run out of things to talk about here. I realise this part of the video is completely aimless. I didn't really go in depth on anything or have a coherent point, because that's what Rage is, really. It's nothing. This game's open world, by the way. I forgot to mention that because it just has no bearing on anything. You use it to drive between levels. They should have made a Mario map screen with a tiny Rage Man instead. I'll give it this, it wasn't much of a chore. Two Human and Knack were boring. Like, I was constantly checking how long I'd been playing those games because they were so mindless and dull, but I never got that with Rage. I was just playing the game, so that's nice, but like, I also didn't have a tantrum when I had to take the bins out. Like, the game isn't awful to play, but why am I playing it? I at least liked Two Human for what it was trying to be. It failed, but there were ideas under the development mess. Rage is just kinda nothing. It's the type of game that most reviews would say is fine, and therefore you should pick it up if cheap, but I'm not gonna lie to you like that, viewer, because I am in love with you. It passes the time, yeah, but there's so many things you can do in the world. Why is Rage one of the first you think of? Go for a walk. Or if you can't be bothered doing that, watch Mechanical Violator Hokkaido. It's sort of this game's plot, or what plot there is, done right. This guy gets found in a cave and starts just fighting all the weird angel authority people. It rules. Robots bleed and have their guts pulled out and shit. There's a melodramatic speech about flowers. It's free on YouTube. It's great. Just don't play Rage. Play or watch or read any of the many things Rage takes from instead. Shit, play Rage 2 instead. It's not even very good either, but it's at least got a decent combat system. An actual system, not just some guys that feel good to shoot. I don't want to be really horrible to this game, like, I don't want to be the angry reviewer who's gonna send this game to hell, bleh, or anything like that, because I'm sure tons of people put years of passion and hard work into it, and that's why I'm sort of baffled, honestly. It's not the internet's weekly buggy punching bag where it was just rushed out or something. It works fine. It's just so forgettable and uninteresting and doesn't feel like it's got any creative spark. I'm not even feeling rage, I'm just feeling like complete nothing of a game. Like Knack with better pacing. Put that on the box. It was a waste of time and I don't really want to spend more time on it. So I'm moving on now. Thank you, Rage. I hate you. Whoa. I give it 1 out of 10. There's this bit in Rage 2. Spoilers for Rage 2, I guess, but like, you know, where you meet the guy from Rage 1, Nicholas Rain, who's a completely silent protagonist, and I didn't know had a name until like 5 minutes ago. But you meet him, and the game's supposed to do this big reveal where it's like, wow, that whole time, that guy, that was the famous Nicholas Rain from Rage 1. And I thought, that's kind of funny and dumb. And I scrolled down and all the comments are just like, that's not the Nicholas Rain I know. They didn't get Rage 1 guy right, how dare they? You see why I didn't want to just talk about Rage? Like, top depressing video right there. It gets nicer, but I got a memorial for my dead cat right now because I don't know where else to put this, really.
Just like the wind.
Anyway, back to nice things I like, because it also developed a series of little mobile RPGs that are above all else kind of cute. Probably because they started as basically a hobby project. John Carmack got a little Java phone around the mid-2000s, and after looking at what else was on the platform, he thought, huh, and got a team together to make Doom RPG. They weren't trying to push like the boundaries of technology or anything, they just played around with the limited tech of Java phones to see what could be done. And what could be done was Doom. Again, but this time as a turn-based RPG, not the Dragon Quest type with parties, but instead a first-person dungeon crawler where each time you move or attack or whatever, it counts as a turn, which, considering the dungeony roots of the previously mentioned Catacombs 3D and Doom's Blood, works pretty well. You complete little puzzles and fight monsters. The combat focuses really on resource management and positioning, as you keep an eye on your ammo, choose when to use items, and predict how enemies will move, and therefore how best to approach them. Which is Doom when you think about it, just at a pace that fits this hardware. For once, it probably can't run Doom, or at least not comfortably, so it just aims to keep the feel of Doom without the direct mechanics. You even have to deal with weapon range that feels kind of accurate to Doom. It is maybe a little simple, it's not a deep RPG or anything, pushing more quick action than character building, as stats are usually assigned for you. That's fine, but I think that the enemy types could have had more going on. They're accurate to Doom, but maybe to a fault, as there's a lot of enemies that'll just walk up to you, or stand in the distance and shoot. Archviles revive others, lost souls are quick and weak to the fire extinguisher, which is fun, and revenants explode on death, but a lot of encounters can be solved by just sitting round a corner and waiting with a shotgun, or trading blows back and forth. It doesn't quite capture the combat dance I hoped for, but it works, it's engaging enough. They made like 4 more RPGs, so other people must have liked it, and otherwise the game is just pleasant. It's hard to find sources for this sort of thing, but I've heard this was written by John Carmack, and that kind of makes sense. This doesn't feel, professionally written. There's weird things like words repeating and characters feeling like they're all written in the same voice, but along with not being a professional writer, John Carmack's a big fucking nerd who's the best dungeon master, and that comes through as well. The game's very jokey, but its jokes are so geeky. There's jokes about getting command lines wrong. There's a lot of meta jokes or references which would probably make my eyes roll if it didn't feel like the person behind them is so genuinely into it. Like, they end up endearing because you can tell this guy thinks he's so funny for the syntax error stuff. There's a plot as well. An evil scientist tries to take over the UAC through a mind control device. It's nothing great, but it's there, and the tone for it feels completely confused in a way that's fun, with scientists who just don't seem to care that everyone around them is dying and that there's demons in the next room. This kind of goes with the presentation, which I can only describe as fan-like, as mean as that sounds. Plenty of Doom assets are here, along with others that are just a bit, off. For example, new enemy types are just recolours. Get ready for Blue Cacodemon in the next game. NPCs are sprites with the same repeated 2-frame animations, but will have individual names and plot relevance and dramatic death scenes. It's all little things, but it gives the game this unique and endearing feel to it. Like, this is a professional, certified, real video game, but while playing it I was reminded of stuff I'd make when I was a kid, in the best possible way, like huge epic stories that don't have the budget to hide the nerds sitting behind their computers making them. And I'm talking about jagged edges, but it's a Java phone game. It's incredible that this even has edges to be jagged. Like, do you know how much of a mess these games usually are? A while back, I spent a few days where, my personal entertainment or whatever was just this Nokia brick and a book. And I would have loved to have Doom RPG on this thing. It has Snake built in, along with a bunch of trials for Tetris and rubbish, really. Aside from Tetris and Snake, every game on this thing is just something to do with your hands. The most basic games you can find, because that's the standard for this library. Going above that is only seen in specific cases like this, because Doom RPG is actually cool. It's got a character to it, along with not amazing but perfectly engaging gameplay that makes this pretty good for its short runtime. And things only got better from here as we moved to Orcs and Elves. This one released on the DS alongside Java phones, so that's the version I'm playing. Emulated, so you'll see my Garfield cursor, and if that's a problem, then just fuck off. I'm not doing this with you right now, so just don't even. This is the only one of these RPGs I had any experience with before this video, because I had it on my DS when I was younger. It might have been the first id game I played, to be honest, actually. I got it when I was pretty young, and remember years later being like, it's made the game with a fucked cover, because honestly I don't know what this is. I can see it's a dragon now, but I did not see that when I was younger, and I really shouldn't have to adjust my sight to see a dragon. Dragons should be like... Between Quake 1 and Rage's releases, this was actually its only original IP, based in a fantasy world where the mountain city of Zarkarag has been attacked by orcs, and its dwarf inhabitants have fallen. As Eli, an elf warrior and son of the famous elf adventurer Eol, you must battle through Mount Zarkarag, wielding your talking wand companion, Elon. And defeat the orcs, alongside whatever evil powers they may be working with. It's dumb. It's dumb generic fantasy. It's called Orcs and Elves, but that ended up working for me, to be honest. I assume John Carmack didn't write this one since he was at least the director of Doom RPG. Well, here he's only credited as a programmer, and his, at the time, wife, Catherine Anna Kang, took that position. They've both been on a couch with Trent Reznor and his dog Daisy May, and I can't seem to pin down an exact thing she does. Not in a bad way or anything, just she's a game designer, CEO of Fountainhead Entertainment, a machinima maker, director of business development. Like, she jumps about a bit, but was quite involved in these RPGs, producing and designing a few, along with being the president of id Mobile. id Mobile, not ID Mobile, that's unfortunate. Turns out John Carmack did write this though, along with Anna Kang, and hopefully Daisy May had some input, because it keeps a similar comedic tone to Doom RPG, being a big, epic fantasy plot that's clearly written by someone fairly geeky who's just having a nice time. The generic fantasy theming of it all fits this tone really well though. There's mischievous rat people who trick you and then immediately hide behind your help. There's a dragon merchant who you can bring gems to or barter with. Then if you take the piss, she lights you on fire. The system's a bit pointless, but I like that it's there. You talk to all these dwarves as well. They're a really important part of the plot, but they all look the same, and the game is just like, yeah, what can you do about it? Making similar jokes to Doom RPG. You can even see your feet in the menu because it's just your tool belt. It's cute and characterful while still having this epic quest, and that kind of tightrope walking tone between fun and serious has, at least to me, always been a part of that typical fantasy world and style. Look at these wizards I got. This is mostly just to show off some wizards I got, but they've got this power to them. They're ready to kill while wearing these ridiculous clothes. That's what Orcs and Elves is like. It's goofy, but it takes that goofiness in strides, and that works really well for it. The gameplay itself is improved as well. It has less of an emphasis on ammo management, as you'll be using stuff like swords a lot, and it has more of an emphasis on item usage and equipment, as you have a collection of potions and ales with different effects, and rings that'll change your stats. It's still not deep, but it has more RPG-ish things you have to think about than Doom RPG. They also improved the enemies, since it's not basing everything strictly off the Doom roster and just does its own thing. There's a lot of different enemies with a lot of different abilities. Weird lizard guys that teleport as they attack, and monk type guys who take cover. Different species have different weaknesses, like ghosts are weak to magic, and others have different attacks, like spiders can poison you. There's just more going on, which applies to the weapons as well, as they aren't all just gun now, and have specific uses that are more or less helpful at different times. Like a Medusa scroll that freezes enemies but is fairly inaccurate, which is good when you're surrounded but not really worth it in one-on-one fights. Again, it's still not deep. I found myself kind of mindlessly cutting through guys after playing it for a while, but again, Java phone game. I don't think you're meant to play it for an hour at the computer. And otherwise it's really cool. It doesn't quite have the same awkwardness of Doom RPG that I liked, but it improves a lot of stuff, and honestly I prefer it. I would have loved to have Doom RPG on my Nokia, but I would have loved, in italics, to have Orcs and Elves. This feels like it fits pretty well on the DS, never mind the thing I played Ninja Run on, or whatever. After this, it released a couple more RPGs, which I can't play. Orcs and Elves 2 is probably cool, but looks similar to Orcs and Elves, and was only released on Java phones with no PC port yet. Doom RPG got a fan-made PC port, by the way, that's how I played it. Sorry, I never mentioned because it's the same game. Like, no, I didn't play it on the Nokia, you got me. Emulation of these Java phone games seems pretty tricky, so I don't want to mess with that for just more Orcs and Elves after just talking about it. I would like to play Wolfenstein RPG, but that's kind of the same, being only released on Java along with iOS, which is similarly difficult to emulate. Do you really want me to talk about 5 pretty similar RPGs anyway? Think I'm good. And we've got one more anyway with Doom 2 RPG. It's last mobile RPG, which was released on Java and iOS alongside BlackBerry and Windows Mobile. It also got a fan PC port like the original Doom RPG, so that's how I've got it. I'm not sure why it's called Doom 2 RPG and not Doom RPG 2. It's not like more Doom 2-ish than Doom RPG, which used elements from Doom 2. If anything, it's more Doom 3-ish. His name's dumb. I'm furious about it, but it doesn't really matter at all because the rest of the game's alright. A bit more bland than the other ones though. I don't know how much of this kind of RPG formula's improvements came from the games between this and Orcs and Elves, but this feels much better put together as a turn-based RPG. Weapons in the previous two felt kind of samey to me apart from obvious gimmick ones, but here each felt different enough with certain ones working better on certain enemies and having lower or higher damage. They even shoot more or less each turn than others, which doesn't inherently make a difference to the combat, but at least feels like it does. I also like how this one uses goofier weapons. It has a water gun which acts similar to the fire extinguisher, but as far as I can tell, in the original the fire extinguisher only worked on lost souls, and this still is effective against them, but it kind of combines it with the Medusa head from Orcs and Elves. Enemies now flee when it's used, but aggro on you again when you next attack them. It's a cool little mechanic that lets you give yourself a kind of timeout. You can also throw sinks. Not really much use in the game, but it's cool. I don't know. Fire's also given more emphasis as a status effect. It acts the same as poison does in Orcs and Elves basically, but I think enemies just use it more in this. Nice extra thing to think about. Even if it fills the screen constantly, Jesus Christ. None of this is a ton, but as an addition along with some little lockpicking type mini-games, I'd say this is probably the best playing of these RPGs. Yay! Trying to heal or whatever is still kind of exhausting when you're surrounded by enemies taking turns to hit you, but they'd probably put in a fast forward or something for that nowadays. Overall though, plays pretty well. Good, solid RPG gameplay for what it is. The graphics mostly work as well. It's a bit of a clutter with original Doom assets, Doom 3 assets, and whole new assets, but I found the clunkiness of it kind of comes together in a Castle Miner Z-ish way where it has this scrapbook quality to it. Weird, seemingly pointless changes made to designs, old assets just crammed onto new assets, the comic bookiness of a lot of the original stuff. It might not have worked for everything, but it works very well for something like Doom that's already kind of punky and wears its inspirations on its sleeve. The blandness I mentioned comes from the writing. It's just more professional. It doesn't have the nice goofy fantasy world I liked from Orcs and Elves, and it doesn't have the weird Game Master type writing of the original Doom RPG. It's just comedy Doom, and it does that pretty well. There's a bit where an NPC asks you for 50 UAC chips to continue, but then after a pause he says he's kidding. That's like comedic timing in Doom 2 RPG. It's wild. It's not bad or anything, but the plot just kind of follows a typical evil entity taking over the UAC, and then they make a few jokes in there. I didn't find it as interesting as the originals, like office politics and programmer jokes, and don't really have much to say on it. In fact, that's kind of the case with Doom 2 RPG in general. I'm an idiot, and this is probably the best one of these RPGs. It's the Doom that you love, with the most engaging gameplay and a funny narrative. This is probably what you'd think of when you hear Doom 2 RPG, and it rules. They really did just build this whole comedy Doom RPG for mobile phones, including still Java phones somehow. I just think I prefer the others a little. At least the ones I played. The first Doom RPG feels really charming for being essentially an experiment in a specific corner of the games industry at a specific time. And Orcs and Elves feels similar from how it just gets right into its geeky fantasy aesthetic since it's not basing itself on anything. Both of these feel free in a way that Doom RPG 2 doesn't. I'd said it wrong, goddammit. Both of these feel free in a way that Doom 2 RPG doesn't. It's the complete finished Doom 2 RPG product ready to be sold, but I just found it less interesting because of that. In fact, it's maybe worth keeping in mind how the mobile game market evolved over these releases. Doom RPG was only released on Java back in 2005, but the port I played of Doom 2 RPG was based on its iPhone version. This was 2009. That existed by then. Mobile games were still in a bit of an experimental phase, but it was becoming an actively profitable market rather than just like an extra toy. Angry Birds came out in 2009 as well. People were taking interest in this stuff, and I think that's the gap between Doom 2 RPG and Doom RPG. Not to paint Doom 2 RPG as this evil product, and a lot of it will be down to the developers just learning, but I think that these two games show an interesting divide in the intention behind the market. Are you making this to explore new tech or make money off new tech? Small intentions like that show, even in cases like this where it's not a black and white case of like art versus money. And you can kind of see this in the rest of what I talked about here. We went from cute platformer introducing a new helpful programming development to blech, that introduced a certain way of streaming graphics that's kind of helpful to certain people in a certain part of the industry. One of which was a small game in a niche market, and the other was put on shelves as from the creators of Doom and Quake. I'm not trying to get at it selling out or anything, but it's interesting to see media created by some of the same people, but on completely opposite ends of the scale. Rage was big, it had a lot of money behind it. Hovertank 3D? A couple months. Yell at the government in the mission briefings if you want, who cares? It took me longer to make this video. It's a carelessness towards projects that ends up giving them their individual quirks, and while it means that the overall quality goes up and down, it's better than just flatlining and not trying anything because of the sunk costs. Easy to say when I'm not running a big game studio, but it still may be relevant to smaller art. Try stuff. If it doesn't work, then who cares? It's uniquely yours, I guess. I don't know. I'm going off in one again and I don't really know how to... What the fuck was that?
I don't think I'll ever live to see a prophet. I don't want to be a locket clinging to a chest till the last breath.